Hello, good day. This is Sir Yuan, and welcome to World Literature. If you're watching this video lesson, it's either of two things. Number one, we are in a online setup, or we are in a state of emergency where we would need to resolve or proceed with online asynchronous video lessons or lessons. Anyhow, we'll be still catering to some questions. If you have any questions or clarifications, right after you watch these video lessons. There will be two video lessons for this particular lesson. This will be for poetry and its elements, and later will be for drama and its elements. So let's begin. Now, when we talk about poetry, you need to ask yourself what comes into your mind when you hear the word poetry. Um, how is it different to other certain literary styles that you may have um, gotten accustomed to or may like or prefer? Also, if you were to write a poem right now, what would be your subject? This will be a topic for a activity later on, so do take this particular question um, into a particular context where you'll be more or less creating your own poem. So let's begin. Let's begin with Robert Frost's definition of a poem. A poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. So again, uh, repeat that. A poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. First thing you need to remember and consider is the pronunciation of poem. Um, it's something that I just remembered. Most people, or rather most students nowadays, would read this as poem. This is not poem. Poem is something soft, something you will lie down when you would like to sleep. So that's a poem. Poem is poem, i.e., poetry. Okay, so I've had a lot of issues with that. Not because I have more knowledge than you are, but it's just that when we talk about poetry, and also when you study poetry, you need to consider its pronunciation as well, especially for proper English pronunciations. So again, a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. Usually, whenever we listen to a poem or read a poem or recite a poem, especially if we are able to understand it, we are able to perceive a particular, or rather receive a particular insight into the author's mind, the author's message, the author's tone, the overall, um, how would you say, the overall aesthetic attribute of a particular poem. However, once everything is done, once you're able to appreciate the poem as it is, you're able to see the wisdom, the meaning of the poem. And so it is the goal, especially with literature, when you read a poem, when you recite a poem, when you hear a poem being performed, you would be able to, well, first appreciate how the performer recited the poem, how you read the poem, how the poem was written, and at the same time, once you're past that, you'll be able to understand the meaning of the poem. Now, what is poetry? Poetry is a form of literature that uses aesthetics and rhythmic qualities of language. Now, what are these aesthetic and rhythmic elements in language? Well, first thing you need to remember are, uh, especially in elements with poetry, is that poetry has lines and stanzas. Now, poetry is divided into lines or groups of words. Lines, in the context of poetry or of a poem, are organized in units of meaning called stanzas. The lines in a stanza work together to express one key A blank line called a stanza break signals that one stanza has ended and a new stanza is beginning. So we have here an example. Um, we have the poem I love to write poems. Then we have here that the poem is arranged in a series of lines. So we have here indicated with red, that is a line in a poem, indicated with the color purple, that is a stanza. Now, in between the two stanzas, the first stanza and the second stanza, the blank space there, that's what we call the blank line, of which there is a break. Then therefore, from the first stanza or up to the second stanza, there could be a continuation of an idea or a separation of the idea, or a different idea altogether. Next element that you need to remember is refrains and repetition. Now, a refrain is a line or group of lines that is repeated at regular intervals in a poem. It reminds the reader of a key idea, a concept, an attribute, often repeated at and usually at the end of each stanza. So you may equate this as your rhyme schemes or whatnot. Another would be the variations, changing one or more words with each repetition. So we have here two examples. We have an example of a poem with a refrain and one with repetition. Let me just perform this quickly and then we'll try to dissect them so that we may be able to analyze the poems and analyze what are the differences between a refrain and a repetition. So we have here the cat so silent lay curled up on the rug, a fire ablaze, the room so snug. Purring, purring, quiet and still, purring, purring, content from his fill. Tatters the cat, big, fat cat. He had just eaten a dinner of fish. What a treat to have, filling up his dish. Purring, purring, quiet and still. Purring, purring, content from his fill. Tatters the cat, big, fat cat. No more cold for the day he was in, for the night fun he had when the day was light. Purring, purring, quiet and still, purring, purring, content. Tatters that cat, big fat cat. So that's an example with a poem, a poem with a refrain. And then let's try to, I'll try to perform one example, one poem example with repetition, and then we'll try to analyze um, what are the differences and the similarities. So let's just try the sun, because it's quite shorter. The the other poem. Here goes. Someone toss a pancake, buttery, buttery pancake. Someone toss a pancake and flip it up so high that now I see the pancake, the buttery, buttery pancake. Now I see that pancake stuck against the sky. Okay, so we have here a refrain and a repetition. A few poems with a refrain and repetition. Now, with refrains, similar with songs, refrains are repeated lines or repeated stanzas, especially in certain positions or intervals in a poem. So, with the first poem, I believe the title here is Tatters the Cat. And so the refrain is being repeated every after the refrain is being repeated after each stanza. So this refrain as a stanza separates uh, the other stanzas from each other. So we have here the first stanza, and we have the refrain, and then the third stanza, and then the refrain. Sorry, second stanza, and then the refrain, and the third stanza, and then the refrain, and then it ends with um, the same line from the refrain. It's just that it is being separated from the original stanza or the original refrain, as opposed to the other two first two refrains that the last two lines are part of the whole. The last refrain, the its last two lines are being separated by a blank stanza. Or sorry, a blank line. So if you notice here, we have repeated words in a particular order. So we have purring, purring, quiet and still, purring, purring, content from his fill, tatters the cat, big fat cat. And so the stanza here talks about probably what the author or the writer is trying to say. And the poem is, well, basically, as per basis of the refrain, is based around the idea of the cat, of Tatters. And so this talks about, from this particular perspective, from its material, from the material source itself, this talks about the, well, a good day for Tatters. This talks about his experience for that particular day, that particular moment, how, how laid back it is, based on the words that is being used. Again, I won't be dealing on the analysis too much, as we are only talking about the refrain, just to not confuse everybody. So, refrains. It separates each stanza. Now, the repetition uh, is also a repeated line or a repeated stanza. However, it is being shuffled uh, to how would you say that, to mimic it, or rather to have it sound in a very specific manner. And I'm not sure if that makes sense, but well, what I'm trying to say is that usually with poems, it has this sense of how would you say that, the aesthetic, its aesthetic quality. And so when we repeat a line and we alternate it based on the interval of that particular word on a particular stanza or on a particular line, it creates a sense of bliss, I would say, for a lack of a better term, that it gives the audience, the listener, the immediate impact that it sounds a little bit more literary, for, for a lack of a better term again. It sounds sweeter as it is being, as the sounds are being repeated. And so that particular repetition, and also its variation, its variation of sounds per line, creates a particular dynamic in a particular poem. I hope I'm making sense. The third one you need to remember is rhythm and meter. So we have your sound devices. Um, Poems usually use sound devices to create a particular atmosphere, a particular rhythm, a particular pace to the poem itself. However, again, if you're performing a poem, there's always a particular variation. So, a rhythm is a beat created by stressed and unstressed syllables in a word. Now, We have here symbols for stressed syllables, unstressed syllables, and uh, the other one, which is feet, units of stress and unstressed syllables. Uh, Meter is measured in feet. So we have your feet are divided by slashes or a line. We have here a meter is a pattern of, oh sorry, is a rhythmic pattern, I would say. So we have here an example just to give you more definition to rhythm and meter. So again, we have here unstressed syllable and stressed syllable. I'll try to read this particular excerpt from a poem using the symbols on top. And so this is how you're supposed to, well, this is the prescribed way of reading the poem based on the symbol. Now, with every feet, we'll pause ever so briefly and then we'll just continue with the next line. So here goes. Just sit right back and you, sorry, that's wrong. Let me do that again. It's unstressed. Here goes. Second take. Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. Okay, I did read a few of them incorrectly, my bad. But again, I hope I'm making sense here when we talk about rhythm and meter. A poem, to become a poem, should have a rhythm and a meter. Without this, it loses its charm, I would say. Um, as poems are usually performed, it has a particular finesse that we need to study, that we need to practice, that we need to analyze if we would like to perform it. Now, if you think about it, uh, spoken word poetry performers, they also have a particular rhythm. If you're able to catch it, if you're fond of listening to or watching to spoken word, so spoken poetry performers, then you'll be able to spot their rhythmic pattern and meter. Okay. So again, that was lines and stanzas, refrains and repetition, rhythm and meter. And fourth one is rhyme. Now, rhyme is a repetition of vowel and consonant sounds at the end of words. For example, tin and pin, hand and sand. So we have here the sounds of N. So tin and pin, hand and sand. So there's a consistent consonant N sound. We have here a rhyme scheme. So when rhymes follow a particular pattern, that's what we call a rhyme scheme. Over to your left, this is an example of rhyme and rhyme scheme in a particular poem. In this case, in a specific excerpt. So let's try to read this. Try to read it with me so that you'll be able to appreciate rhyme and rhyme scheme. So here goes nothing. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail and pour waters of the Nile on every golden scale? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm kidding. So let's talk about rhyme and rhyme scheme. Um, if you notice, end words usually with poems, they rhyme with certain words in another line. In this particular case, we have here a rhyme scheme of AB, AB, AB. And so it alternates. So we have here A, we have here the sound aisle, and with B, we have here ale, right? So with Going back to the rhyme scheme A, we have crocodile, Nile. So there's an I, um, a vowel sound, io, io, tay. So we have here tail and scale. A, a, a sounds, vowel sounds, a vowel sounds. So you have ale, scale, crocodile, Nile. They all have the letter L. This is to give emphasis and also to confuse and alienate the audience as to why, although they look and should sound the same, they are indeed different from one another, and therefore the rhyme scheme is different. This gives a poem its particular charm aside from its rhyme and rhythm. I hope I'm making sense here so far. Additional sound devices we have here alliteration. It is the repetition of consonant sounds in the beginning of words, as in slippery slope. So slippery slope. So you have your consonant sounds S, T, yeah, SP. So slippery slope. We have your repetition is the use of any element of language, a sound, word, or phrase more than once. And then we have onomatopoeia as the use of words that imitate sounds. Example, we have splat, hiss, gargle, and other uh, words that imitate sounds like boom, bramble, something like that. Let's see. With an example of alliteration, we have Peter Piper. So Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where is the pack of peck? I don't know, forgot. Sorry about that. But yeah, that's how it goes. And so if you notice, we have here the repeating consonant sounds. Also, with alliteration, the the consonant sounds overlap the sorry connects the next consonant sounds, creating a particular sense of how would you say that? Particular sense of naturality with how it should have been with how it should be said or performed. So we have here another example. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. We have here repetition, miles to go before I sleep. This is by Robert Frost. Um, denotes something of a journey before we take a rest. We have furthermore to go before we have our eternal rest, so to say. Other poetic language or shade of meaning. So we have denotation and connotation. Denotation, dictionary definition of a word. Connotation consists of the ideas and feelings that a word brings to mind. So we have here roses, books, and trees. So when you think of roses, what are roses? These are flowers. If you give your girlfriend or boyfriend flowers, it will have a particular meaning based on how it was given. Was it given through a sense of love or through a sense of hate? So if it was given through a sense of hate, then probably the other person is wishing you to die. If it's through a sense of love, then it's about, that particular feeling of feeling what's the English equivalent for for kilig, giddy, you know. So you have that particular sensation where you're not quite sure what you would like to do. There's that particular uh, sour taste in your mouth. Can be good or can be bad. It's just that you're very, very anxious and it has that particular feeling, that particular meaning. Let's say books. What are books? Books are physical records of um, anything written in language. Uh, what does it mean? Yeah, books are knowledge, something like that. Another shade of meaning we have here imagery. Um, Imagery is descriptions that appeal to the five senses. Imagery helps poets convey what they see, hear, smell, taste, or touch. So let's say, for example, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And the one traveler long I stood and looked down on. Sorry, let me just read that again. Two roads diverge in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Um, if you try to analyze the lines, Robert Frost is using certain words to depict a particular scene. So Robert Frost is trying to make the audience imagine the scene, what the author is trying to say, so that the audience may be able to come up to a particular uh, meaning, to a particular value or sense of morality. We have here figurative language, language that is not meant to be taken literally. We have three common types. We have simile, metaphor, and personification. Very quickly, simile uses the word like or as to compare two seemingly unlike words or things. Metaphor describes one thing as if it were something else. Personification, human qualities are given to non-human objects. So for example, with simile, his hands were as cold as steel, the pillow is like a cloud. So we have here hands as cold as steel, pillows like cloud. For metaphor, life is a highway. Her eyes were diamonds. He is a shining star. So we have here eyes like diamonds. So instead of writing like in between, just describe it as something else. So her eyes were diamonds to denote something like a very valuable thing. So life is a highway, life is a journey. Personification, the wind howled in the night. Bea heard the last slice of pizza calling her name. Something like that. And so we have here non-human elements or objects. We have wind howling in the night like wolves. And then the second one is the pizza calling someone else. So the pizza has that particular human quality where the pizza spoke. Now in poetry we have three kinds. We have the lyric, the narrative, and the descriptive and didactic. Let's try to describe one at a time. We have here lyric. A lyric is a comparatively short, non-narrative poem in which a single speaker presents a state of mind or an emotional state. So we have here an elegy. An elegy is a poem of serious reflection, typically a lament for the dead. Most poets structure their elegies using quatrains, which are four-line stanzas. So we have here by Lord Tennyson, In Memoriam AHH. I hold it true where befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And so it is of a it has very serious qualities. Uh, it is like talking to an audience about a person who has died and somehow was not able to, you know, experience love and failure. And so his or her life is incomplete. So that's an elegy, usually in quatrains. We have an ode, a poem in which a person expresses a strong feeling of love or respect for someone or something. We have a sonnet, a 14-line poem written in iambic pentameter, iambic pentameter, which employ one of several rhyme schemes and adhere to a tightly structured thematic organization. We have here a dramatic monologue, a poem in the form of a speech or narrative by an imagined person in which the speaker inadvertently reveals aspects of their character while describing a situation or series of events. We have here a sonnet. A sonnet again is a 14-line poem written in iambic pentameter. Usually a sonnet is arranged in quatrains with the line with the last stanza as a couplet. So we have here three quatrains in a couplet, that is a sonnet. So let's try to read Shakespearean sonnet here. From fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die. As the riper should by time disease, his tender ear might bear his memory. But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feeds thy light flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself thy foe to thy sweet self too cruel. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament, and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud bears thy content, and tender chore makes wasp in the garden. Pity the world, or else this glutton be, to eat the world's dew, but the grey and thee. I'm not a very good poem performer, just so everybody know. Short story writer, that's where I'm good at. However, I do write poems from time to time, not in the traditional manner. Now, narratives. We have here three: epics, mock epic, and a ballad. Now, narratives are a form of poetry that tells a story, often making use of the voices of a narrator and characters as well. The entire story is usually written in metered verses. Epics is a long narrative poem written in elevated style, in which heroes of great historical or legendary importance perform valorous deeds, usually also with epics. Epics contain fantastic creatures like dragons and whatnot. For example, Beowulf. With Filipino epics, we have the epic of Indarapatra. We have uh, from the Samal culture, we have what was his name? I forgot. But there's a long poem. Sorry, a long epic. What am I saying? There's an epic from the Samal people, of which I think uh, most of the people in Samal don't know. That's what I think. That's what I heard. Anyway, moving on. Mock epic are typically satires or parodies that mock common classical stereotypes of heroes in heroic literature. So we have here Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock. We have ballads, a poem or song narrating a story in short stanzas. Traditional ballads are typically of unknown authorship, having been passed on orally from one generation to the next as part of the folk culture. So we have here The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, 1865 to 1939. Descriptive and didactic, so both lyric and narrative poetry can contain lengthy and detailed descriptions. So we have descriptive poetry or scenes in direct speech. So we have dramatic poetry. Now, a descriptive type of poem is one that mainly describes the subject, whether it be a person, an animal, or an inanimate object, often in great detail, rather than telling a story or expressing one's feelings. The purpose of a didactic poem is primarily to teach something as opposed to a descriptive type of poem. So let's see here by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait, not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies or being hated. Don't give away to hating and yet don't look too good or talk too wise. Rudyard Kipling. You would notice there is a particular, I do have a particular thing with poems. It's not like I dislike poems, it's just that I'm not very good at it and I try to read it as if they were my own. Anyway, so from the example, is it a descriptive poem or a deductive poem? Sorry, didactic poem. If we say it is a descriptive poem, then we are able to see that the author was able to describe a particular subject of which you need to so a particular subject per line or per per line. So for example, the first line, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. And then there's a continuation to the second line, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, and it goes and on and on. So there's a particular imagery where you are trying to be calm, trying to be composed, as opposed to other people who are losing their minds, running amok, um, doing some stupid thing. It begs the question of, the poem. Is it, oh, what is the meaning behind the poem? If we look at it in a didactic way, or if we say that this is a didactic poem, what is it trying to teach us? So, again, is it a descriptive poem or a didactic poem? I would say it is a didactic poem because it is talking about a particular value of which we need not to succumb to the ways of the world. We need to be just passive. By Rudyard Kipling. Now, additional forms of poetry, we have haikus, free verses, and concrete. I'm a free verse type of guy. Haikus, three-line Japanese form that describes something in nature. The first and third lines each have 5 syllables, and the second line has 7. So that is 5, 7, 5. Free verse poetry defined by its lack of structure. It has no regular meter. It has no rhyme. It has fixed line length. There's no structure or any specific stanza pattern. Now, concrete concrete poems shaped to look like their subjects. The poet arranges the lines to create a picture on the page. So we have 2 examples. Heavy gray, pure white, a drama of changing sky, blinding silver blue. So if you try to uh, count the syllables, so we have heavy, gray, pure white, that's 5 syllables. Drama of changing sky, blinding, silver blue. Okay, this is a haiku. This looks weird mainly because this is in English. Usually with haikus in the Japanese form, using Japanese characters, you'll be able to understand its aesthetic qualities, although you may not be able to understand it directly. We have here concrete poem. My umbrella keeps out the sun, my umbrella keeps out the rain, my umbrella gives me shelter. except from a hurricane. It's shaped as an umbrella. Free verse, usually used by spoken poetry performers because they are able to express themselves properly. Like I said earlier, I'm a free verse type of guy. This is not to say that I'm a spoken word poetry performer. I just like poems with free verses. Now that is it for poetry and its elements. We do have an activity. I have sent it to you via Quipper. I hope you are able to submit it on time so that you may be able to have a good score, especially with the activity. Now we'll move on to drama in a little while. Just sit tight.